Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia Online. I'm Laura Kovacs, and I'm honored to be here. Katherine May's work includes The Electricity of Every Living Thing, Burning Out, and No Stress Meditation. Her new book, Wintering, is a meditation on the fallow periods of life, times when we must retreat to care for and repair ourselves. Katherine May thoughtfully shows us how to embrace the opportunity these moments offer. A reviewer for The Guardian writes, "There is so much to treasure here. She could protectively convince us of anything. The pleasures of cold weather, slow days, dusty libraries. They all start to seem like prizes, and her sensual connoisseurship a joy." This evening, she will be joined in conversation with Tracey Matisak, award-winning broadcaster and journalist, and longtime friend of our author events program. And now, Katherine and Tracey, the screen is all yours.
Laura, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for being with us for our final event of the season. And I, for one, am absolutely delighted to have an opportunity to speak with Katherine May about her wonderful book, Wintering. So Katherine, welcome to the Free Library.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I want to remind our audience that if you've got questions for Katherine, and I certainly hope that you will, you can click on that Q&A icon there at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. And we've budgeted some time toward the end of our conversation for your questions. So you can put them right there and we'll get through as many as we have time to do. So that said, Katherine, the book is entitled Wintering, The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times. We might as well start at the beginning. What do you mean, or how do you define winter in this sense?
So I've got a very particular use of the word wintering. I use it to describe the physical season of winter, but I'm also talking about a time in life that I think many of us will recognize very clearly. So it's a time when something happens that means that we drop out for a while. So that could be coming from a physical or a mental illness. It could be a life event like a divorce or losing your job or a bereavement. And sometimes it just comes from something that's left of field, really, just from a surprise that changes the course of our life for a while. But the point that I'm making in the book is that what unites those times is that we feel very isolated for a while. We're cut off from the rest of the world, and we might feel frozen, like we don't know what the next action is to take.
Sounds a lot like where we are right now. We're certainly in the midst of a global winter, if you will, with COVID, and
Mm.
we've all had to drop back, and I think we've all felt that sense of isolation. I don't know when you started to write this book, Katherine, but surely you could not have imagined when you started writing this book that it would come out in the midst of a global
Yeah.
winter like COVID-19.
I don't think any of us could have imagined this. I don't think any of us saw this coming or thought it could be possible. And I mean, the book came out about 3 weeks before we went into lockdown in the UK. And even at that moment in the UK, none of this seemed possible then. We could almost see it coming. We were hearing news about it. But I remember the conversations at the time were all about, oh no, it can't, it's all exaggerated, it can't possibly happen. This year we've had to come to terms, we as a global community have had to come to terms with such a radical change in our way of life. And that has left loads of us isolated, but in so many different ways. You would think that we were all finally sharing the same winter, and finally this moment had come when we'd get a kind of collective understanding of what it means to winter. But actually, what it's produced are loads of different kinds of wintering for lots of different reasons. And we're forcibly cut off from each other, which makes it 5 times as hard.
It does indeed. And I want to circle back and talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in our conversation. But the book begins with your own personal winter in your life. What happened?
Yeah, so I mean, in many ways, my story in the book is quite unremarkable, but it was seismic for me. So the book opens on the eve of my 40th birthday, when I'd gone with some friends to the beach to have some fun. And my husband fell very suddenly ill. And it turned out he had a very severely infected appendicitis, which it was touch and go, honestly, for quite a few days. And this was a moment in my life when a sort of sense of mortality and fragility really hit me, when I thought actually how unstable my world was and how easily it could have been disrupted. And he pulled through and was absolutely fine after a fortnight. But in that time, when I'd been sitting by his hospital bed, I'd realised that illness had been creeping up on me, and that I was actually quite chronically ill with a series of kind of gut disorders. There was a lot of fear around that. I went through a big diagnostic process that was very frightening. And at the same time, I was leaving my job. So everything was changing, everything was up in the air. And just when we thought we got a handle on the whole thing, my son had to be pulled out of school because he became too anxious to carry on. So we had a season when not only did everything change in a massively uncomfortable way, but when I think all of us felt a little bit like pariahs, a little bit like we weren't part of everyday society anymore, and that we couldn't find our way back in again.
You know, you write that you were sort of just going on about your life when your husband became ill, and that his illness almost felt like an inconvenience because you were having a great time at the beach and, you know, on the eve of your birthday. And I think that winter has a way of doing that, that it sort of takes us by surprise, and we experience a form of denial, I think, at least early on.
Yeah, I don't think any of us want to recognize the winters that come to us. There's always a moment when you are thinking, no, 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 not now, not now. I mean, when I don't know when we think now would possibly be.
There's no good time.
No, no. I mean, it's a bit like the hero's journey. You know, there's supposed to be that phase of refusal of your quest. I think we do all refuse our quest when it comes to us. We want to push back that winter, or we think we can maybe solve it. We think we can maybe delay it forever if possible. And you know, some winterings, when they're the result of a very sudden accident, there's a sense of, can I just wind time back now? Can I just freeze frame and turn everything back? And of course, none of those things are possible.
Yeah.
But it's our human propensity to bargain that makes this so painful. I think we think we can talk our way out of it, but very rarely can we do that.
And that's one of the key points that you make in the book, which is that it is our tendency to want to delay or deny winter in our lives, and that we're so much better off by accepting it.
I think we have an instinct, there's a kind of flinch that happens when we're approaching a winter. We're very invested in moving away from it. And the truth is that it's that flinch that's painful. And we can spend decades in that flinch, like trying not to fully engage in our winter and recognize it. And that puts us in this perpetual state of flight, really, of trying to escape something that, I mean, in the book, I call it irresistible and inevitable. We you know, you can't delay the season of winter, and neither can you stop your personal winters. And the case I'm trying to make in the book is that actually, if we can learn to see winter for what it is, to recognize it as a very normal part of the life cycle, and to walk in it consciously, to live through it very deliberately and knowingly, that actually that softens the blow, but it also helps winter to change us in positive ways too.
You know, you mentioned a moment ago that you were in the process of leaving your job because of your own personal winter and your health concerns, and you talk about the guilt that you experienced, about the coworkers that you left behind, and always feeling this need to justify being signed off from work. And I thought, isn't that interesting how we so often feel that we need permission to take care of ourselves, or we need to justify self-care, that there's a sort of selfishness about stepping back and taking care of ourselves in winter.
Absolutely. And just a huge amount of shame. You know, I think even if we're sympathetic to other people's suffering, we're so harsh when we judge our own. We so often want us to be the best almost. We want ourselves to cope better than everyone else. Like I want to be a super person. I don't just want to be an ordinary person. I want to be the person that looks stress in the eye and laughs, and I am rubbish at doing that. You know, let's level here. I was in a very stressful job. There was a lot of conflict in my workplace. I was leading 2 degrees. I was managing a group of staff who, like, in all frankness, did not get on with each other, and that's a mild understatement. And I felt like I was crucial to that all holding together. I felt like I was the only person who could do that. And when I finally, I mean, literally, the moment I had to leave my workplace was when I was bent double over my desk in agony, and on the phone to my GP, who was saying, okay, I need you to get the bus home and take some painkillers, and we'll take it from there. I experienced this absolute flood of guilt, and I felt very paranoid, actually. I wondered what they must think of me for dropping out at this moment, and I imagined the whole thing just falling to pieces. And you know what? It didn't. I mean, I think my colleagues had a tough term because they had to fill in for their head of department, but they coped, they were okay. And that then leads to the very difficult knowledge that you're not as crucial as you think you are, which first of all is awful to know, and then becomes very comforting. I was smaller in the scheme of things than I'd imagined, and me leaving for actually very good reasons opened up space for other people to finally step into being better than they were when I was holding everything for everyone.
It's very liberating, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. It really, do you know what? That's so true. I think there are so many things in this life, and I think it might be more true for women as well, because we're often holding so much around family and friends as well, and trying to be so crucial to everybody and trying to take care of everything and make sure everything's right, particularly around this time of year. And it's really liberating to know that whatever the circumstances, other people will manage without us. We are not that vital. We can step back. We're allowed to rest.
You had some incredible adventures as you wrote this book, and I want to talk about some of them. But before we get to that, you mentioned a friend from Finland and a conversation that you had with her about how in Finland they prepare with great intentionality for winter because they have to. And I wonder if you would share a little bit of that conversation with us and what you learned about preparing for winter to the degree that any of us can.
Yes. So the Finns, I mean, my friend Hannah, she's from originally northern Finland. And so from about October right through to the spring, they have heavy snowfall, and so much is impossible for them. There's really very little they can do to combat it. And so she told me, and this really shocked me, that they start preparing for winter in July. That it's that early. And at that point it's quite nice, relaxing stuff. They're going out, they pick a lot of mushrooms. The Finns eat loads and loads of mushrooms. They're very good at identifying what's safe to eat, which is not a British skill. Like we would poison ourselves in seconds. And so they gather all these mushrooms, they dry them. In fact, she sent me photos this year. She went out to her summer house by a lake, which most Finns have, and she showed me a series of like 8 tablecloths covered in mushrooms that she'd picked, all drying in the sun. So they really stock up, and they're all ready for winter. They're picking berries, they're pickling, they're making jams and preserves, but they're also baking to freeze food, because it's really important to give hospitality if someone drops in winter. So they're stocking up, not just with the basics, but with really good things that they can enjoy and take pleasure in. They're also chopping loads of firewood, because the sauna is vital to the Finnish culture, and it's a really important moment in their day. They are making sure the house is well repaired. As she said to me, like, we can't afford to have our pipes freeze. Like, quite often pipes freeze in Britain. We're rubbish at looking after them. We can't afford to have that. We can't have a leak in the roof, because if you've got snow on your roof for 6 months, then you're going to lose your roof.
Bad things will happen.
Yeah, so they have to be really conscientious about doing it. But she also taught me a word, which is talvitalet, which is this process of putting away your summer clothes and getting out your winter clothes. making sure everything's in good repair, making sure everything's aired and ready. And that for her is a kind of, it's not just a practical process, it's a change of mental state, it's a movement towards the mindset of winter.
So what can we take from that, Katherine, when you think about the preparations that people in Finland and other parts of the world go through to prepare for literal physical winter? What can we take away from that in terms of preparing for the winters that will inevitably come to each of us?
Yeah, well, I think the key thing that's impacted me is the sense of expecting the next winter to come, not in a pessimistic way, but just knowing that there's this cycle in our lives of good times and less good times. And as soon as you adopt that very simple belief, you can get prepared. And that will be different for everyone, but it might mean, having a financial buffer if you can achieve it. But it might also mean just making sure that your house is a wonderful place to be for the next time we're stuck in. Or it might be something as deep as kind of remaking your friendship networks to make sure that the people around you will support you perhaps better than the support you could access last time. It might be sorting out your mental health in the good times or in the better times, ready for the next crash that will probably come, or getting on top of your health and fitness or your diet or whatever it is you need to do. So I think the actual practical action is different for everyone, but what unites them is this sense of acceptance. Winter is coming, as we learned from Game of Thrones, and we do well to know that and to therefore be able to make the changes that we need to make in order to make that easier the next time.
So I mentioned that you've had some amazing adventures, and one of them was a trip that you took to Iceland, and you swam in the Blue Lagoon and promptly crashed. You had this experience that some doctors call the letdown effect, where after a prolonged period of stress, after it's over, we kind of crash. What happened on that trip, and what did you take away from that experience?
Oh, this is such a common pattern in my life, as you say, this letdown effect. I went for my beautiful swim in the Blue Lagoon that I dreamed about since my teenage years, and as I came out and got changed, I started to feel ill, and within an hour, I had, like we talk about having the flu, I had the proper awful flu, in a foreign country. I managed to, like my husband and son carried on playing in the lagoon because they were having a nice time, and I was sitting in the cafe with my head in my hands thinking, I don't know what to do. And we got home and I just had to go to bed for a couple of days. I mean, I think I don't have tonsils, but I think I had whatever tonsillitis is if you don't have tonsils. It was really devastating, actually, because this was a dream holiday for me, and I couldn't do as much as I wanted to. But I hunkered down and got into bed and that's the other thing. You can't just go and buy paracetamol in Iceland in a pharmacy. You have to have a consultation with someone to get like the basics of.
So, and would that be like a Tylenol here in the United States?
Yeah,
like acetaminophen or an ibuprofen?
Yeah, like,
or
what is it you take to take your temperature down? What would that be?
So
would that
we
be
would
a
take Tylenol or Advil usually. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So no, that is not available. They do not have the wonderful numbing throat spray that we all have stocks and stocks of in the UK. So even that was very disorienting. But I had to just put myself to bed, drink lots of water, and I got my Kindle out and started reading children's books. I reread the Philip Pullman books, and actually found a huge amount of comfort. I could see exactly what had happened. The minute I let my guard down, I let some germs in too. And it felt kind of inevitable. It felt like I was learning a lesson that, if you don't choose to rest, you'll be forced to rest.
Yeah, one way or the other. You mentioned throughout the book the idea of liminal spaces. What are they, and why are they important?
So the idea of a liminal space is a space that's almost between two worlds, or on the edge of your world, or of your perception. And I see wintering as a liminal space. We're not in the mainstream world anymore. We're on the margins. We're falling through the cracks, however you want to put it. And I mean, I'm kind of, I think this is probably a weird thing to say, but I'm a kind of fan of liminal spaces. I love ghost stories in particular. I love those kind of uncanny moments in life where we're not quite certain what's going on. But the value of those things is that they take us away from everyday action. Actually, they give us permission, which we'd never give ourselves, to slip away. And that lets us watch the world for a while, maybe. It lets us step back and be strange in the world, because I think sometimes we are strange and a stranger. And when we are in that state, we are open to kind of transformation and to change, but we're also in contact with our discomforts. And it's not a comfortable place to be, but it's a very kind of analytical and transformative place to be. Yeah. I don't think it's anything that, you know, we necessarily choose, but we do find ourselves in those places. And I think when we're there, it's really important to know that they're okay. They're actually safer than we think they are, because there's a route out as well as a route in.
Yeah. So speaking of liminal spaces, you wrote that you discovered one of those kinds of spaces in the middle of the night, and you write about struggling with insomnia, about waking up in the middle of the night and catastrophizing. Not that I can relate to that.
No one does that, right?
I think many of us can relate to that. But you discovered some really fascinating things about us as human beings, and about a liminal space that once existed that we've kind of lost track of in more recent times. Talk about that, if you would.
Yeah, so I've always seen myself as quite a bad sleeper. I think everyone will relate to this, really, but I'm quite a light sleeper. I wake up a lot in the night, and I associate that with anxiety. You know, you wake in the night and you think, oh no, what am I going to do? This is awful. I'm going to be tired in the morning. Why can't I sleep? Why can other people sleep and why can't I? What's wrong with me? And I'd have been through all that, you know, like having an app that tracked the quality of my sleep and all of that stuff. But in the course of writing the book, I did some research on how our sleep looked before the Industrial Revolution, and actually right up through the 19th century as well, until it was really common to have electric light. And without electric light, without clocks, without all of the things that intrude into our spaces these days, certainly without an iPad screen before we go to bed to read on, without all of those things, we slept in a really different way, particularly in the winter. So when you think about it, the long winter nights would have been quite hard to endure without much light. And people fell into this very common pattern of two sleeps. So it was known as the first sleep and the second sleep. And it was completely ordinary to do this. You'd go to bed early. It's probably like 8:30, 9 o'clock. That's my favorite time. That's when I'm definitely beginning to feel sleepy. And you'd sleep for maybe 4 hours, maybe a little bit longer. And then you'd wake in the middle of the night. And what people described, in fact, what's interesting about the research is it's quite hard to find descriptions of this time, because it was seen as so ordinary and unremarkable. People didn't write about it. They didn't see it as special or particular. And so you have to find references to it in passing. But when you look at what people say they did in that time, it was a very particularly calm time, when people undertook activities that were really about contemplation, about processing the day. So they would pray or meditate, they would make love, they would chat. They talked about kind of a certain kind of conversation with families, that a light conversation where they would be solving problems. And interestingly, when Hannah told me about her sauna, she talked about a very similar state of mind between families there. And so they'd be up for a couple of hours. People like to go and smoke as well, which I thought was quite funny. After that, they'd go back to bed again and sleep until the sun rose. And it lit a light bulb. Sorry, probably a light bulb is the wrong metaphor to use, but it lit a very dim candle in my head, because it was actually the pattern that my sleep had been trying to fall into for ages. And when I started just getting up in the night when I woke up, all of the anxiety began to drain away. Like the kind of monstrousness of my fears didn't seem so serious as soon as I got downstairs. And I get up in the night regularly now. I often write. I still stay away from my screen, although every now and then you'll get an email from me at 2:30 in the morning because I've had a thought that, that couldn't
in that liminal space.
Yeah, like a really good idea that maybe doesn't seem so important. My agent knows about my 3 a.m. emails. It's when I'm very concerned about something very specific. But yeah, I write or read, and I find that my writing and reading are even different to daylight time. You know, like I read in a very ambulatory way in the middle of the night. I'm not charging through a whole novel. I'm often picking up a book and looking down the index for something I'm hunting. It's slower. There's no pressure. It's not real life. It's separate. And it really has transformed the way I sleep, actually.
So you said that they called that the watch back at the time when people were doing that. And it made me think about another watch that you undertook when you and a friend of yours piled all the kids in the car and took a trip to Stonehenge for the winter solstice to keep watch. Tell us about that experience, what that was like, and what you took from that as it relates to the winters in our lives.
As you're beginning to notice, I did a lot of things I've always wanted to do when I was researching this book. And you know, every year in the UK, we have a newspaper report just after the winter solstice of what looks like a bunch of completely crazy people converging on Stonehenge. But the reason it appealed to me was partly because I was curious about what was going on, and I was looking at ritual associated with winter. But also, it's one of the only 2 times of the year when you're allowed to actually walk amid the stones. So normally there's a big fence around it, you're kept quite far away, and the stones had always seemed very tiny to me from there. I mean, a little bit disappointing, maybe. That's probably a terrible thing to say, but you know, like kind of underwhelming. So I really wanted to do this, and I asked my friend if she'd come with me. She's always up for that. So we got the kids up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Luckily, she lives quite near Stonehenge, and drove down in the kind of completely black winter night. And I had an extraordinary experience, but not the extraordinary experience I'd expected, because the people that converge on Stonehenge are so diverse, actually, that there's no one thing going on there. It's kind of open season, but in a really glorious way. So loads of different beliefs are arriving there to practice what they need to do to mark this, what I now see as a really special moment in the year, which is the first day after the shortest day. So the sun rises through the middle of the henge. Well, in fact, sorry, I mean, I've made that sound romantic. It was such an overcast day that we didn't see the sunrise at all. It got lighter. In other years, the sun has risen. The sky faded from black to grey to white, and we considered ourselves done after a while. But what was really beautiful is, as we got closer to dawn, everybody converged right in the middle of the stones, and people were drumming and singing and playing mouth organs and ringing glass bowls and like masses of different things. Some people were wearing red robes. There were people in spaceman suits. There were people like us in kind of outdoor wear, looking a bit awkward. But it was really fantastically beautiful to be in those stones as we can guess they would have been used 4,000 years ago. And to touch those stones, you know, they were so big close up. They were not small close up, and they were textured and covered in ancient lichens, and you could see the chip marks where people had hewn them from wherever they were taken. And it was really a life-changing experience for me, in that it taught me a lot about how we don't have to all mark the same thing in the same way. We can do it our own way and still give it meaning and still respect each other's meanings as well. It was a deeply tolerant event. It was wonderful.
Yeah, and important to mark the passage of time in one way or another as well.
Yeah, so after I'd visited the henge, I interviewed Britain's chief druid, Philip Carr-Gomm, and he told me something that I will take with me forever, which is that the kind of modern pagan belief divides the year up into the wheel of the year. And that's based around the solstices and equinoxes and some other festivals in between. But what it gives us it gives them is a festival every 6 weeks. And he said, like, in really dark times, you realize the importance of having something, an event, whatever it is, every 6 weeks, because no matter how hopeless you feel, you've got something very soon to look forward to. And it marks out these beats across the year. And I think that's so incredibly wise. I think we've lost that. We have a lot of festivals in winter because we clearly still need them. But in the summer, maybe it all gets let go of. And this year, above all other years, I think we've learned that we need those beats back.
Yeah. So from Stonehenge to the Arctic Circle, which was another adventure that you had, and you took a trip there, you sailed the fjords and you saw the northern lights and even saw some reindeer while you were there. But you were also, as you write, confronted with your own limitations on that trip. And I wonder if you tell us kind of what happened there and how you were able to do what so many of us struggle to do, which is to make peace with the fact that we are not invincible.
Yeah. Well, so that took us back in time a little to when I was pregnant with my son. And I did not have a good pregnancy. You know, I did not have one of those glowing, blooming, wonderful pregnancies. I was very sick the whole time. And I had booked this trip to Norway, to Tromsø, because I just had this urge to see the Northern Lights. And I knew that once I'd had the baby, it was going to be a long time before I could actually go and do that. So it was a last hurrah. It was really hard to persuade my midwife that it was safe for me to go, but she kind of reluctantly did it in a kind of on your own head be it kind of a way. And I had to show her that I was staying near a hospital in case anything went wrong. I had very high blood pressure, you know. And I mean, I didn't regret it for a moment. I was incredibly tired. They were just coming out of the polar winter, so the sun was peeking over the nearby mountains for like a few minutes every day when we arrived, and most of the day was this twilight that they have. It's not completely dark, it's just very, very low light. And being pregnant and tired anyway, it made me so sleepy. So I was just sleeping for hours and hours every day, and then waking up to go on these northern light hunts in the evening. And it was such a fascinating thing, because I as we've all seen those, you know, that footage of these bright green northern lights swirling across the sky and being really dramatic. And in real life, they're not actually like that. That footage is sped up and it's taken with, you know, very kind of long exposure cameras. In real life, the northern lights are really pale and quite indistinct. And that's the beauty of them, because they're actually quite mysterious and you have to get your eye in to see them. You can't perceive them straight away. You need to develop a kind of relationship with them almost, and an expertise, and to go hunting for them. And I mean, they're so pale you can see the stars through, which I always think is quite a good indicator of how little light they're giving. And, you know, over the course of those few days, I learned to see the northern lights, and it was wonderful. And then I started seeing them everywhere once I'd seen them a bit. It was great.
Yeah. Must have been an incredible adventure to be able to see that. And also, well, two things come out of that. One is that you tend to head north during difficult times. And I know for many people, at least here in the US, I think our tendency is to head south. We want to go somewhere warm and tropical that feels kind of comforting. But you have this tendency to go north when times get tough.
Yeah, I keep trying to coin the term borealist, you know, like a lover of the north. Like, it's not caught on yet, but one day I'm going to get there with it. Yeah, it's definitely true for me. I want to march north. I mean, I'm not comfortable in the sun. I burn and I faint and I just hate it. I get prickly heat, you know. It's partly that, but I'm really comforted by the north. I find it incredibly beautiful. I love the colour that the Atlantic turns in the north. You know, it becomes this really sapphire blue. I'm obsessed with the sea anyway. I love the kind of, you know, pine forests in the north. I love the way the air feels. It feels clean and cold. And there's something in that that gives me space to breathe and to think. And yeah, I think all these people that head south should try the north just once in a while. I honestly think it's got a lot to give us.
Well, that takes us very nicely to my next question. In fact, I'd love to have you read a passage from the book because so many of us dread the literal winter because of the cold weather that it brings. But you have argued in this book that cold has a healing power all its own. In fact, at one point you say we put ice on an injury and why not on a life? And so
It's a
you
life.
have taken that to another level, Katherine. You have immersed yourself in frigid seawater. Many of us here in the United States, I mean, people certainly do that here as well too. And then there are those of us who just marvel at the people who do that. But I would love for you to read a passage from the book where you talk about that, and then we can talk some more a little bit later. It's
Sure.
the portion of the book where you and Emma decide
Mm,
to take the plunge on New Year's.
okay. We ended up driving the short distance to the seafront, reasoning that we could quickly get back in the car and put the heater on full blast when we finished. I won't lie, I'd memorised the symptoms of hypothermia just in case. We crunched onto the beach and made our reckoning with the water. It was 6 degrees centigrade and drizzling. The water was closer to 3 degrees. The sky was a uniform white and the sea a churning grey. Right, I said, come on, the quicker we do this, the quicker we get back home. Emma counted down, 3, 2, 1, and we ran, stumbling over the shingle and into the waves, emitting a battle cry that turned into a squeal as we hit the water. I got in thigh deep before deciding to launch myself forward to take a few strokes. That's when the cold hit me, a vast, bitter wall that kicked the breath out of my lungs. It was so absolute, so vicious. I flickered my arms in a feeble attempt at breaststroke, but it was impossible. The freezing water had drawn me tight together like a brittle rubber band. It felt something like fear. I had no scope for movement or even to draw in air. It was as though the sea had gripped me in an icy fist. I found my feet and ran back out of the water again with Emma in hot pursuit. Afterwards, while we stood on the beach with towels piled around us and a cup of hot tea in hand, something strange happened. Gazing back at the water, I felt the urge to do it all over again, to go back and exist in those crystalline seconds of intense cold. My blood sparkled in my veins. I was certain I could conquer it a second time around, could tolerate a little longer in that frozen claw. That was brilliant, I gasped.
I don't know, my lips are blue just thinking about it. But you've done that many times since,
Yeah.
Katherine. What is it about that is so healing for you?
I think healing is a really good word, actually. And I think what you need to remember when you think from dry land about swimming in cold water is that Rome wasn't built in a day. And even the most devoted ice swimmers build up slowly. And I think, I mean, there's loads of things that goes on. I'm a sea lover. I live by the sea. I am always soothed just by the sound of it. You know, just sitting on the beach and listening to the waves takes my stress levels down 10 notches. So, you know, that is my landscape, and it's a way to be in my favorite landscape in the winter when it can feel, you know, pretty impenetrable actually. But the cold itself has an effect. It immediately, and I really mean as soon as you get in, it immediately forces you to straight into the moment. So you have to be attending to your own needs in that space because it's cold and cold is dangerous. So you have to take your mind off of all of the silly monkey business that it's doing and into the state of your body and how it feels. And that begins as soon as you submerge, because you do get that tightening of your rib cage, and you need to work out how to take that first breath in again. Once you've taken the first one, the other ones follow, but that first one can seem like a challenge. But once you've stayed in for a while, it stops feeling cold for a little while. That's what's interesting. So honestly, I'm still scared every time I get in. It still feels ridiculous every time I get in, and so cold. And I never swim alone, so I always go in with a friend, and we shout and scream and grunt and groan like seals as we get in, because you kind of have to sound off. It's so shocking. But then this blissful calm hits you, and it's such a dreamy, beautiful, ecstatic state of mind that comes. And actually, kind of blood analysis shows that it's a very similar blood profile to people that have taken ecstasy, the drug. So it really is, yeah, loads of serotonin, just feeling like everything's all right with the world, like all your troubles are left on the shore, and you're in this beautiful, unique space where nothing can get you for a while. And we always find ourselves chattering like crazy, chat, 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 chat. Everything flows out of us. We're laughing, we're sharing really personal stuff. And we're in for 5 or 10 minutes. It's quick, you know, you get cold, you come out as soon as you get cold. But that time is like a week's worth of therapy. It's wonderful.
Wow. Well, for those of us who may not have the opportunity or the proximity to be able to take a dip in frigid water, you also write about walking in the cold in the chapter entitled January, and you write about walking to fend off negative emotions. And I was thinking about, for myself and probably many of our listeners, I've done a lot of walking this year because of the pandemic, because it's one thing that feels somewhat normal in the midst of a time that is so abnormal in every way. And I wonder if you would talk a little bit about walking, especially in the cold, as kind of a coping mechanism.
Yeah, walking is my big coping mechanism, definitely. I think walking is almost literally grounding. You know, you're pounding your feet on the ground, and you're re-establishing your sense of gravity when everything feels like it's floating away. I particularly like walking in the cold. I think that it is calming to walk in the cold, believe it or not. You can kind of, it requires that you pick up a rhythm, I think, to keep a bit warmer. And that rhythm can soothe us. It's like a heartbeat. You know, it's what we remember from the womb, almost being carried along, bump, 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 bump. It brings regularity back in. It reestablishes our relationship with time. It's like a clock ticking when we walk. And then there is the kind of encounter we have with beauty when we walk. Like, most of us will walk somewhere that gives us that sense of awe, or that makes us, you know, makes our eyes glad, whether that's in the city or the country. And I think that, I mean, I used to run, and I can't run anymore because my joints are too bad. But the difference that I've noticed between walking and running is that I can notice the world in much more detail while I'm walking, and my attention can sink into it. And even when I'm walking the same route over and over again, I notice different things every day. You know, I notice how plants change every day, for example, or how the light is affecting a familiar view. And I learn a little bit too, you know, like I might notice a new wildflower and go and look up the name. And then the next time I see it, I repeat that name to myself. They're all very tiny things, but again, you're shifting your mind, aren't you, out of the worries and just onto something else for a while. And I don't think we should underestimate what a relief it is to do that, actually. I think those small gestures are as good as the really big gestures of healing.
Yeah, so beautifully expressed. Before we get to our audience questions, one last question. And you, as you write in the book, winter, of course, does eventually come to an end, but you tell us that we need to emerge slowly from our winters. What do you mean by that?
Winter doesn't end in a day. We defrost, I think. And we all know that when we're defrosting something from the freezer, we shouldn't rush it because we'll get food poisoning. I think we can learn a lot from that. The thing about emerging from a winter is that we're not ready all in one go to face the world again. We need to ease ourselves in. We need to be kind to ourselves, actually. And part of that is that we need to give ourselves time to adjust to how we need to do things now, as opposed to how we did them before our winter. Our winters taught us something about ourselves. I mean, actually, I think what's coming next year is going to be really informative about that, because, okay, we've got a vaccine coming. There's going to come a point when it's safe to go out again. And I think all of us know in our gut that we're not going to immediately feel okay about just going out into the world. We've made all kinds of adaptations. We've absorbed new rules in this last 12 months. And that's going to take some fighting back against. That's really going to take some kindness to ourselves, because I think we could end up feeling quite anxious in spaces that once felt very safe and fun to us.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there's an aftermath to come. Quite often there's a moment, like when the danger's gone, that the true emotion hits us. And I think there's loads of us that have been on emergency functioning for a long time now, just coping, just dealing with what's coming up, just tackling those blazes as they arrive. And it's only when all of that goes that the feelings are going to hit us, you know. And I think we've got to be ready for that. I think there's another wave coming, and it's not a pandemic wave. It's a wave of realization and understanding. And we're going to all have to find loads of compassion for each other in that time. We're going to have to learn to listen to each other very, very hard, because there's going to be lots of people feeling odd in the world, feeling emotions that they don't fully understand for a while. And it's going to, I think next year is going to be a uncomfortable year in a way that we're not expecting. It's not going to be as straightforward. Sorry, that's not a very positive message, is it, as we get towards the end? But actually, again, I mean, that takes us right back to what we said at the beginning. We need to be prepared for the shape that winter actually takes, rather than the shape that we hope it will take, because I don't think it's going to land in the way we think it is at the moment.
Yes, and there's a great deal of wisdom in that. We've got a number of questions from our audience for you, Katherine. So I'll start with one from Brianna, who says, as we prepare for this next winter, amidst COVID-19 no less, is there one comfort that you turn to that you would recommend for others?
Ooh, a personal one. Hot baths, Brianna, honestly. But I think, I mean, you know, again, it's going to be different for everyone, but I think it's really important to identify your comforts, actually, and not to deny yourself. We can create almost forced suffering because we feel like we have to, you know, draw back and not enjoy ourselves in these really difficult times. But I'm a great believer in finding moments of joy whenever we can, however difficult life is. And for me, that's a hot bath every morning. And I am struggling at the moment because my heating system has broken down and I have no hot water. So my morning bath has become washing over the sink, like rather miserably. Oh, washing your hair over a sink. Honestly, it's just horrifying. So I am denied my favorite comfort. And I've got the boiler engineer coming tomorrow. And if he cannot fix my boiler, I am booking myself into a hotel for the night just for a hot bath. Like that's it.
I think it's the only prudent thing to do.
Yeah.
This one says, hi, Katherine, Lauren Antonelli from New Jersey. Thank you for your beautiful book. I am savoring it. So much of what you share in your book are such personal thoughts. During your writing process, how did you balance the freedom of self-expression with the desire to self-edit? And do you plan to offer virtual writing workshops in the new year?
Oh, okay. So that's a really interesting question, because I think that takes us right to the heart of what it is to write memoir. I think that the impression maybe that we give out in our memoirs is that we've shared everything. And actually, the stuff I share is quite carefully selected and edited to offer some protection, but also to like share moments that cut to the heart of what I want to say, but that maybe limit the exposure of my real life. And like that was particularly important to me when I was talking about my son. I mean, you may notice that I only talk in very general terms about his suffering in that time, and try and keep the focus on wintering. And you know, I had to think very carefully about how to handle that, because I didn't ever want to do anything that he would regret me doing in the future. That's, you know, that's kind of that's the memoir writing process. This is my third memoir now, so I'm kind of an old hand. But interestingly, in this book, when I first sat down to write it, I didn't intend to reveal anything about my life at all. I thought, I'm done with memoir. I've been really revelatory. It's hard, you know, it's really, there's a real anxiety when you, just before a memoir comes out, about what people will think of you, about those bits of yourself you've uncovered. And I thought I couldn't face it again. But I couldn't avoid, you know, I like, this stuff was happening while I was trying to write about wintering, and I couldn't keep pretending I had a distance from it. I had to write into that space. And I'm glad I did, because what I've learned every time I've published memoir is that people are so generous about it. They're not prone to going, "Ooh, you weirdo." They say, "Yes, yes, yes, yes." And that's a joy. I do teach, actually. I run an online creative nonfiction course, which at the moment is just offline because I'm just tidying it up ready for the next round, but it's relaunching in January. So we talk a lot about that dance of what you conceal and what you give, and how you select them very carefully to set your writing alight. So do track me down online, and I will be talking about it a lot, I'm sure.
And is that so? Can we find that on your website for anyone who's interested in the
Yes.
workshops? Is that where they would?
In fact, if you go to katherine-may.com and click on courses, my memoir writing course is called Writing Your True Story. And at the moment, you can just sign up on the wait list, and I'll email you the minute it goes up. It's definitely going up in January. I'm working on it as we speak, actually. Yeah.
Well, speaking of having things to look forward to, we have
It's
a question
important.
from we have a question from Jennifer, who wants to know why the audio version of the book is different from the US hardcover version. So are there differences there?
It's a very astute question. The US version of the text is slightly different to the UK. It's just different editors choose different parts of the book. And the current audio version was recorded about the UK version. So you never know. In the new year, maybe I'll record the US one. Perhaps that's my next job. But yeah, they are slightly different. Well done for noticing. I think you're the first one, actually. So that's extremely impressive close reading there. We thought we got away with that.
People are paying attention.
That's amazing.
Here's a message from Mary, who says, I have just felt numb during this pandemic. For example, I love to read, but my attention span is 0 now. Sometimes I just stare into space. Any suggestions for making this time more useful and snapping out of my funk? I want to be gentle with myself, but I also feel stuck in a rut. And I suspect that Mary is not alone in that.
Oh, Mary, I really recognize that. I think I've really struggled with reading in particular this year. I'm normally a voracious reader, and I just haven't got the appetite for it. There's something going on for us, I think, in this pandemic, wherein we're always wary. You know, there's a sense that even when we're doing something that's supposed to be relaxing, we're constantly looking over our shoulder. We can feel this threat that we can't quite quantify. And, you know, I think that relates to how much I love this phrase doom scrolling we've been doing as well, you know, on the internet, clicking on bad news instead of looking for good news, that obsession with monitoring the horizon for threats almost. And I think that leads to this really numb feeling. It's hard to get out of that. I do think walking, if you're a walker or can do that, or some kind of movement, getting outdoors as much as you can, like coming into contact with the change of the seasons, how long the days are at the moment, like what phase is the moon in. Just notice that every day. I have a practice where I sniff the air first thing every morning. And just it changes every day, and it tells me something about how the season's moving on. They're tiny things, but they're valuable, and you can let yourself do tiny things. It's generous to yourself to do that. The other big thing for me is to keep my hands moving if I can. So not in any great way, but I enjoy baking and cooking. So making the odd thing, you know, making not making dinner, because dinner's boring. Making a frivolous thing, like what do you really want to eat? What would whet your appetite at the moment? What would give you pleasure to put on a plate and hand to someone else as a gift? That light work, I think, and maybe your light work might be tidying the garden, or I mean, hilariously, so my husband's been having a hard time lately, and he got this look in his eye yesterday and said, I know what I'm going to do today. I'm going to go and clean out all the dog poo from the alley behind our house. And I was like, okay, darling, off you go. And he went out with all these plastic bags and a shovel, and he came back glowing. He'd had this real moment, you know. So what I'm saying there is, it doesn't have to exactly. It made him so happy, and he's still talking about it today as well. He's still like, I'm so glad I did that yesterday. I feel like that's really but actually I have a similar one, which is that I go and pick up litter off the beach, because it makes me feel like I've done a tiny bit of good. It's not hard work, but I have got to sink my attention into it, and it really works for me. And I'm doing a jigsaw at the moment, which helps too. So keep being kind to yourself, keep doing tiny things, and don't get cross with yourself if your attention isn't on the thing that you think it ought to be on. It'll come back when it's ready. But we're attending to danger at the moment, and that's what we've got to remember that we're dealing with.
Yeah. Victoria says, thank you so much for writing this beautiful book and for sharing this time with us tonight. It was wonderful. She says, I love the idea of finding comfort in our own personal winterings by knowing they're temporary processes. But for people who experience back-to-back tragedies or suffer through abuse or chronic illness, it almost feels like winter never leaves before another sets in. Do you have any wisdom to share for moments in life like that?
Yeah, I think that's really so astute to say that. And one of the difficult truths about wintering is that where it leads us isn't always a win, you know. So although every winter has its own narrative arc, its own kind of beginning, middle, and end, the end of that story is not always what we wanted. You know, it's not always perfect wellness, it's not always perfect happiness. And I think we need to learn to look for different things in our winter. So not perfection, but actually to look for the next step that it's showing us we can take. That's our win. And sometimes in our winters, we're dealing with decline, actually, you know, like in the case of chronic illness. And this is certainly true for me. I mean, I've had to really adapt to a lot of change in the last few years about my whole digestive system, which hates me. And that the learning from around that is not how to defeat it and how to get better, because it's just not that kind of condition, but it's how to live better with what I've got and how to adapt to that situation and how to accept it. And I think sometimes the biggest win that we can get from our winter is accepting the change that has come to us as it is, and engaging with what we can do. It's, you know, it's not ideal. It's not the change that we want, and that's hard. But actually, at some point in our lives, we're all going to have to accept that. You know, there's an end game to human life, and at some point we will all face decline. And our job is to keep knowing what that decline is, to look it in the eye, and to accept the change that's demanded of us and live with it the best we can.
Just along those lines, just a quick comment from Joseph, who says, despite the physical isolation from others in this time, I have taken comfort in memory and in dreams, including people I have loved who have passed on. So that is just a comment from Joseph about thinking back on special times and people, and that being a comfort. And then from Louise, who says that she wants to say, thank you so much for this talk and for your wonderful book. Katherine, you speak and write so eloquently and insightfully. The wisdom of wintering has helped me so much. So that's from
Oh, thank you.
Louise.
That's very
Um,
generous. Thank you.
and let me just see. Oh, yes. One last question here, and this is from Tatiana, who says, thank you, Katherine, for this wonderful webinar. I recently got divorced and also lost my job a month ago. Your optimism and your personal stories and the importance of self-care were very helpful and uplifting. Have you found that the learnings from wintering could be useful for other seasons and non-wintering periods of life that would help people to rest more overall and be more in tune with their inner self and be much more happy?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately I'm a megalomaniac, so I'm creating a complete system, really. This is just it's not just about surviving the winters, but it's about how to keep balance in all of life. And that's what that Talvitalet shows us, that actually there's a sense that we need help riding out the highs as well. They can spiral us out of control too. We don't always enjoy the good times as much as we expect to. And what we really need to be able to do is learn to self-regulate and learn to keep our emotions feeling in their comfortable range so that we can experience pleasure and happiness and joy, but that we don't feel tipped over. So yeah, I think the wintering approach is an all seasons concept. Maybe that's my next book, A Winter for All Seasons. I don't know, I've not got the
There you
title right
go.
yet, but yeah, it's about balance, isn't it? It's about finding balance. Yeah.
Yeah, and the wisdom is timeless, whether it's winter or otherwise. There are certain things that are just timeless. Katherine, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed talking with you.
Oh, me
Clearly,
too.
our audience has loved hearing from you as well. We're so grateful that you stayed up way past your bedtime there in the UK to have a conversation with us, and we're also quite excited for you all as the vaccines start rolling out and there's a
Oh
bit of a
yes.
thaw in winter there, and we
Yes.
hope here as well. So, thank you so very much for making this time to chat with us and share your wonderful book with us.
And thank you so much for your wonderful sharing. I feel totally held. It's been lovely. Thank you.
That's wonderful. And also, before we go, I just want to say on behalf of Laura and Andy and Jason and all the folks at the Free Library who work on the author events team, I want to say a special thanks to them. And on behalf of all of us, I want to wish everyone a wonderful, delightful, restful holiday season. Please do stay
Wonderful.
safe. And we here at the library will look forward to seeing all of you in the new year. So thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful holiday. Hope to see you soon and good night, everyone.